introduce our guest, who has been a friend for maybe over 15 years at least. Did I get that
At
right?
least, maybe more.
Yes, and we met together at a seminar in England, which was focused on archival research. And so Jessica and I have worked on a number of different projects together. But what I want to say about her is that she models the kind of scholarship and faculty activity that we really need so much of. Even though she's just retired, you see, she's not really retired at all.
I'm not.
Her willingness to come today was quite stunning. Dr. Seetz Nguyen has worked in the Dean's office. She has been an avid supporter of student travel. She's taken endless trips to London and Rome and throughout Europe. She teaches archival research in England and in London, which is what we're going to hear primarily about. But what I really like about her work is the blend that she makes between real life and digging up information. And I think that when you hear the kinds of work she does, you'll see what research is really about. And the proof of the pudding is that her first book was the direct result of years, I must say, of going through letters and paper. And I'll just stop there and let you tell them about it. But her first book was about the Foundling Hospital in England, in London, and then we produced a book together too. So anyway, we welcome Dr. Jessica Seetz Nguyen, who has just moved back to her home in Pennsylvania from Oklahoma.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And it's wonderful to hear everybody's stories. And I just wanted to thank Marilyn for inviting me. We're lifelong friends at this point. So friendship is part of the academic life, and in your professional life as you grow, every one of us will attest to the need for your academic friends to be in contact with you and talk to you and to share ideas with and to bounce ideas off of. And I am not fully retired, so I'm just going to give you a little clip. For those, a lot of you are from the Philly area. I went to college at Cabrini College, which is now Cabrini University. And then I studied history and philosophy, and I was a double major, and I love philosophy, especially the history of philosophy. I wasn't a very strong writer. That is the benefit of having a literary friend like Marilyn Button to help you teach you how to become a better writer. So I bow to English professors because writing is a conversation, and your work that you do in your research and analysis is always a conversation with a larger group. So after Cabrini, I immediately went to work in a factory, and it was during the Vietnam War. And I thought I was kind of lucky to get a job in an arms production factory. Everybody said at the time, you should go on for your master's and PhD. And I'm like, oh yeah, right. I couldn't fill out the application. I'm not a good model. Please don't follow me, right? So it was another 18 years before I returned to get certified to teach secondary ed at Millersville University of Pennsylvania. And then I earned my master's degree there. I studied, maybe some people will know Reynold Koppel or Jack Fischel at Millersville. And then I was fortunate to receive a PhD offer at Marquette University in Milwaukee. So that's where I earned my PhD. In the process of working at Marquette during the summer jobs, does anybody have a summer job? I had summer jobs, right? I worked almost like all my life. Summer job was really important. And I heard Robert talking about being in academia for most of his life. So from my summer job was in the archives at Marquette. And I worked with a collection of papers that are, well, along with Tolkien papers, but mostly I worked in the Dorothy Day collection. And Dorothy Day is the foundress, the co-foundress with Peter Morin of the Catholic Worker Movement. So for those of you in New York, you might know about the Houses of Hospitality. The Catholic Worker Movement is a very socialistic Catholic community, and outreach to the poor and the working poor was their goal. And Dorothy Day's work throughout her life, and her spiritual work and her material work, framed and shaped who I became. And so through her work, as a historian, we always talk about the politics and, you know, the big names in history, and you know, the leaders, mostly men's history. And suddenly I began to think, well, I think her story should be told. And I also think her story as part of the working poor should be told. And so it came to me that I wanted to answer the question, and this goes for sociology, CJ peoples, and anthropologists, and everybody in the room. What does society say the poor deserve? So initially I was supposed to go to Germany, and I ended up, people that are in PhD, who went through a PhD program, will always know that your life takes special turns. And when it turns, you just have to go that way. You have to follow the turns. And as it happened for me, I ended up in British history, and went to London to do my dissertation research. And with my big question, what did society say the poor deserved? Well, first of all, every archival person, everybody in the archives knows that the archives are composed of things that people have written. And our archivist here will say, I'm collecting written documents. And open parentheses to my colleagues, the academic colleagues, and to young people, think about creating your own archival collection, because I am just doing that now. I saved every letter. My mother saved every letter. I saved so much stuff that I might have 10 miles of archival materials, which I am housing at the University of Central Oklahoma, where I just finished teaching there for 15 years. And I also teach for the University of Maryland Global Campus. But anyway, I advise you to keep your records. People will want to know. I know you say, oh, I don't know. Every single piece of paper that I had in my office, every single conference paper, every single set of notes for books, my dissertation, it all went to the archives. So it's the archives, it's the written collection that researchers have to have. But I have a big problem. And what is that? Well, if you're going to write about the working poor, they are not writing. The working poor are working. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I had a research problem at hand. Does everybody see what my problem is? It was a serious problem. Very few people could write. I'll tell you who could write: people that were part of church schools and communities. There were church schools that taught young people how to write, and they were often writing their autobiographies or keeping daily journals. And in their journals, they would write about, well, it's, I'm Catholic, so forgive me, but it would be kind of like, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I did this right. I did that wrong. You know, forgive me. I did this, that. It tells the story of what I did wrong for the day or what I did right for the day. And so the autobiographies of these working poor people would be a lot like that. But that was not sufficient, because I was not going to get to her story if I just relied on that. So I went to, I'm going to share my screen now, if that's okay. Okay. So I went, let me get there. There's a couple main things that, oh, I have to get the screen. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Just as I was logging in, my mouse went cuckoo on me. So I got it working now. Okay, let me get this to go. All right. So when I went to London, I started out at the Institute of Historical Research, and the people there, again, scholarship is a community of all kinds of people. Scholarship is a conversation. And in the conversation, they said, Jessica, you need to go to London Metropolitan Archives right here. And you need to go to the Royal London Hospital. So I set up appointments with the archivist. The archivist, the holder of the records, becomes your very best friend. They are your friends. They are there to help you. They want to show you the way. So I made an appointment at both of these places, and I worked at the Royal London Hospital for weeks and weeks with maternity registers of poor women who lived in the East End of London. So at the time that I was studying, from 1854 to about 1900, women had not yet decided, women and men, families did not really understand fertility control. So the average woman's life was spent in pregnancy for her adult life. So she would have on average nine children, 9 pregnancies with 7 living children. So that is something that I learned. I have huge records. That material has not yet been published. And then I went to this London Metropolitan Archives, which is not glamorous. It looks like a warehouse, right? It's not glamorous at all. But the archivist was generous beyond belief. And he sat down with me on one morning, I went to see him. And he informed me that I had kind of a pipe dream if I was going to talk about the working poor. And so, you know, researchers here and people who are mentoring, you never turn down a gift horse. You always try to follow what people tell you to do, because you never know what's going to pop up. So here he gave me this list of all these places: the Foundling Hospital, charity organizations, St. Thomas Guy's, City of London, so on and so forth, all the way down to, I think I did not go to Lady Margaret Settlement. I did use the Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, who a doctor, the first woman doctor. And so I went down the list and just checked them off and checked out to see what was happening. Well, the Foundling Hospital, see this up here? Foundling Hospital was opened in received a royal charter in 1739 from George II. And it was founded by Thomas Coram. And the purpose was to take care of out of wedlock children. Instead of having children abandoned in the streets of London, the purpose was to care for little babies. And it has a long and convoluted history. But I was working mainly in the 19th century. The Foundling Hospital demanded that the people who held the records demanded that I go and be interviewed in order to see whether I was a reliable researcher, A, and B, that I would keep confidence and be confidential about what I found in those records, okay? So that was a big burden. I just felt like here I was being evaluated as, really evaluated. And the reason was that in the 1980s, some early feminist historians actually published the full names of the mothers who had received the benefit of this hospital, of this institution. And the families, the families did not want their great-great-grandmother's names published. So I had to promise I would never reveal the name full names of the people about which I would write. And I signed a contract actually to that effect. And there's only one person whose name I revealed, and that's name is Susan Main. And the reason I revealed her name was because she was A, in the newspapers and the public record, and B, she was recommended by none other than Charles Dickens. So one never knows what you're going to find in these collections, but I found three Charles Dickens letters. Well, they're very rare. Anybody who knows anything, where's my English major? She's in here somewhere. Yeah, Charles Dickens, it was just a gold mine. I found this letter, dear Mr. Brownlow, would you please accept this Susan Main? And I'm getting ready to leave to go to Paris, and yours sincerely, Charles Dickens. And I looked at this signature and I'm like, what? No, it couldn't be Charles. It could not be Charles Dickens, really? And then I did more research, and here, when I saw how he signed his name, it was just absolutely Charles Dickens. And I learned that Charles Dickens was knowledgeable about the founding hospital. In fact, he was so knowledgeable in the 1830s that he wrote a little book about foundlings, and that is Oliver Twist. And, you know, the hidden identities of this child. And it all circles around the founding hospital in London. Today, the founding hospital is a museum, and it's dedicated to children and mothers and childcare. And the royal patron is the Duchess of Cambridge, Prince William's wife. So it's a prestigious institution, and they hold art events, and they try to draw attention of society to the needs of the community, which goes hand in glove with my question: what did society say the poor deserve? So this is a picture of our founder, Thomas Coram. And Thomas Coram was a wealthy sea captain who sailed back and forth between the colonies and Britain. It was not yet the United States. And he saw these poor children in East London and Southwark and believed that he had to make a change in their lives. They were abandoned to the streets, and he wanted to affect social change. And there he is holding the royal charter, or the royal seal, that he received from George II, King of England. This is the south view of the founding hospital. It becomes a huge estate in the 18th century. It's open. One can see that it's very open. And it was supported by none other than William Hogarth. And probably of greater familiarity to you is George Friedrich Handel performed the Messiah for the founding hospital charity, and the first time it was performed in London in public. And so music became a central feature of the founding hospital mission and of the collection, and they hold Handel's scores, his original scores and archives there at the Founding Museum. So the foundings themselves performed the music. Every holiday it would be advertised, come and hear the foundlings sing, you know, for 2 pence, you could hear a concert, and you can watch the foundlings perform. And so they became a very public part of the community in London. Here's the chapel where they performed every Sunday. I do want to say that, so by the beginning of the 19th century, the founding hospital had to ration access to the institution because they could not support the children. Remember that There's no infant formula. The only way you can support a baby is through wet nursing. And so they really had to take this seriously. So what they did was they created a network of wet nurses outside of London, and the babies would be farmed out there until they were 5 years of age, and then they would come into the city and they would be educated here at this institution. But you see those walls? Well, the walls are indicative of a selective process that develops at this institution. And the selection process means that they were not about to accept every single baby that was admitted. So this, what I want to say, this is all about my research that I did. I want to say that there are 13 miles of Foundling Hospital papers. And what I used were the petitions. And it's a legal term that they used for the mother's request to have her out of wedlock baby accepted at this institution. And I used covered 50 years of admissions. And in that, I took a 10% survey of the 50 years and just randomly pulled them out of the petition boxes. So the question of location, who was, okay. So who was accepted? How did I know? Okay, so I say I have 3,000 petitions. How are you going to analyze all of that material? Well, it's all about the questions you ask of the material. How do you figure out what you need to know? How do you wrap your mind around 50 years and 3,000 documents? That's a hard road to hoe. So the first thing, any research project, and this is for, I'm talking to our students here, I always ask people to think about the who, what, when, where, and why. But try always to situate your questions. Who am I talking about? Where did they live? When did they live? Where did they live? Always where. The location is important because that's cultivates who you become. And, you know, was there a twist of fate? Was there something serendipitous that happened in that person's life? What is the pivot in which, what turning point happened in that person's life to help them become who they are today or who they became? I can tell you today, I can tell you right now, a professor at Cabrini College told me, you should go, philosophy professor, you should go on. You have a lot to say, go on for your master's and PhD. Okay, it took me 17 years. I'm a late bloomer. You know, it wasn't just something that I just one fine day popped out like this. And none of the people in this room, I'd love to know their struggles. They didn't just automatically, they washed dishes, they swept floors, they did all kinds of things because they had in their mind they wanted to achieve something, and they did. So I think that's these questions of who, what, where, and when are the foundational questions that everybody wants to know. People are curious about things. So one of the characteristics of my study is to figure out where the mothers originated from in London. My first thought was, oh, they come from the poor working class in East London, that they're Irish people and, you know, people that are immigrants. No, that's not true at all. These were the domestics, the people who worked in the homes of the wealthy people in the West End of London. So I actually figured out where they came from and, you know, their background. Interestingly, initially, about 40% could sign their name, but by 1890, 100% women could sign their name, which means they could read and they could also write. Reading is one thing, but writing And the ability to put that idea from your head onto that paper is difficult. And so many of them had somebody else help them answer the petition questions that they had. There's two parts to the petition. One is a demographic survey, and one is an oral interview. So my key to understanding the petitions was a sermon. And I found it one Saturday morning at the London Guildhall. It was a sermon. It just popped out at me. It was a sermon to the founding hospital governors. I read the sermon. You know, you never know where you're going to find a clue. I read the sermon, and this sermoner, James Augustus Hussey, asked every single question that the petitioner had to answer in order to have her baby admitted. So the petitioner, the woman, never referred to as the mother, always the petitioner, had to stand in front of 7 men and answer questions about her most intimate parts of her life, which would, I think, be very difficult. So this is the petition. It looks like a legal document. See that? And it tells instructions for the mothers of children as are fit objects of this institution. It's it's a world in which class and respectability and your character says everything about you. So the mothers would complete this part of the demographic questions to best they could, or maybe they had somebody who could write for them. So you would have the petition of the mother and of the child, and then she would say she's unmarried, you could not be married, you could not be a widow. And she tells when the baby was born and where the father is and when she had last seen the father. And so this is all kinds of data that I crunched up, every kind of data. If the baby was born in a workhouse, which is a public welfare institution, that mother had less than 50% chance of having her baby accepted. Every year, the founding hospital received 200 applications, and every year they had 90 hearings. And of those 90 hearings, somewhere around 50 children were admitted based on whether or not they had space for the children. So every single petition starts out, when first acquainted with the father, I was living where? And this is my job as housemaid. And I met the father on the steamer back from Greenwich. So she was at Greenwich for the day, and she was with her sister. And then they make an appointment. And for my CJ person, criminal conversation is having sexual relationships outside of marriage. Up until 1857, this was a legal convention. Every single woman was treated as a piece of property. If she were caught in an act of, say a woman's married and she takes on a lover, her husband had the right to sue the lover for trespassing on his property. So that should help you see the condition. I wanted to tell her story, and that's what this whole thing unfolded before me. The men asked her how long how many months they dated before they had sexual intercourse. Did he give you drugs? Did he give you wine? Did he give you tea or coffee? Did he give you anything material? So what I found out was that the people who were selected to have their infants accepted here actually were in relationships that were more to, it was 3 to 5 to 10, 9 months a year. These were not really fly-by-night relationships. These were serious relationships that kind of there before the grace of God go I, because as you might know, there's no real cheap birth control. There's no birth control pill. There's no fertility control. The only fertility control are the intestines of sheepskins. They don't have rubber, they don't have latex, nothing. So they don't really know how to control their fertility. And some people say that, women were told that they were most fertile at the beginning and end of their cycle and not in the middle. So bad information also contributed to this. But, this is just part of life. And these women knew that if they had a baby, they could not keep their job. So they have choices that they have to make. And their choices were tough. They could try to have a self-induced abortion, and women did. They did that. They threw their baby in the Thames. They abandoned their baby on the street corner. They put their baby in a shoebox and left it on the train and jumped off the train. All these are newspaper stories that I collected. They drowned their baby in Hyde Park. It's just, really some kind of, it's a different world. The past is a foreign land in many ways, and yet it's just like us. These are people who are like us, who have the same problems. So in the end, I ended up with a large study, and I put it together into a book and had it published in 2012. And it's a labor of love. I'm glad that I did it. I look forward. I have many more things to put together, many more projects. When first acquainted with the father I was, that's chapter 4. Chapter 5 and 6 is my own name required. Children could not, if a woman didn't give her name, she didn't have a hearing. And I think this is really, these are quotes from the petitioners. If you will kindly take her from me, you will save my character. So these are just quotes that I picked up that I really love. Quotations are really great evidence. It's from that you can form the content of your work. Here's Dear Mr. Brownlow. Now, Mr. Brownlow, remember, was also in Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist. Remember, he's the kindly old gentleman that helps Oliver. Well, here it is, Dear Mr. Brownlow. So there are stacks and stacks and stacks of mother's letters that were just stuck on, like they'd have a piece of wood with a nail, and then Mr. Brownlow just like, okay, another letter, whoop, another letter, whoop. So years, 15 years of mother's letters. Dear Mr. Brownlow, can you please tell me how my baby is? Dear Mr. Brownlow, can you please tell me if my baby is walking and talking like other children? Dear Mr. Brownlow, can you please tell me if my baby's hair has come in? May I come to see my baby? I'm coming from Australia. May I come to see her on such and such, April 25th? I'll be in London. These are heart-wrenching things. A mother's love is really, really, really tough to deal with. And, these are heartfelt letters of communication. Finally, in conclusion, this is a painting done by Emma Brownlow, Mr. Brownlow's daughter, about a foundling restored to her mother. But actually, in the 50 years, only 3 children were restored to their mothers because the foundling hospital was reluctant to relinquish these children. They stayed at the school until they were 14 years of age. They were all trained, educated, could read and write, could play instruments, could sew, they had all kinds of skills. The boys had skills. The boys were frequently sent to the military academies as buglers and drummers and so on and so forth. And then they received honorarium of about £1,000, which was a lot of money at that time, to go on with new clothing and to go and start a new life. So they did not want mothers who just frivolously gave up their baby, and now that their child is ready to get a job and could take care of them in their old age. Remember, there's no Social Security. Their children were their Social Security. So they didn't want the mothers to exploit these children who they had cared for over about 14 years of their life. So again, it's serendipitous. I really worked through these things. I would say that it's one of the most fun things I've ever done in my life, and I would welcome any questions that you might have. And I just want to sum up. You're never too young to start your own archival collection. You're never too old to start organizing it and give it to an institution that will benefit from it in the future. And you just never know. You know, things are serendipitous. Things happen, and you move ahead and hope that you can make a good difference in this world. So that's my talk. Questions, comments, anything you have to say?
Hi, this is Audrey with Love Dorsey. You actually answered one of my questions. I wanted to know if the children were paired with their natural mother, or could their natural mother keep up with them? But then you said in the end that the orphans were, I don't want to say trained somewhat, in a position where did many of them connect with their parents? Did they seek their parents out or their mom out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll tell you what they did do. Initially, they named these children after wealthy people. So say there was the Duke of Gloucester, and they named him John Gloucester. Well, this child would go to the wealthy family and say, hey, my last name is Gloucester, and I must be your child. Why did you abandon me? So children did go in search of their parents. And now today, the founding grandchildren are out looking. I mean, that's the value of this book in a way. There are founding grandchildren who go out and look for clues to their grandparents. And naturally, they want to know. So it's more common today than in the past. It's a great question. Yeah.
So you mentioned they were named, but who named them?
The governors named them. So then what they did was they came back with a naming process. So they used the names from the Bible, and they used all ABC. You know, they went down gave them biblical first names, and then they found geographical locations, and they gave them, as long as they were not names of well-known families. Yes.
Your research is fascinating and reveals once again the ridiculous, absurd, patriarchal nature of society. Did women ever move up to have positions of authority, or were the men still running the show constantly? And also, what could get your child rejected? Under what circumstances would they say, nope, this child's not coming here? And I mean, I have a whole load of questions, including Dorothy Day, the anarchist, but I can't get into that right now, but let me listen.
So the first question is about what's your first question? One is patriarchy. Oh yeah, well, that is a brilliant question. The only place for women was in as the heads of the girls' dormitories, and they had no voice in. Now, I'll tell you where the women did have a voice, and that was wealthy women who wrote letters on behalf of their maids and their wet nurses. So that's how but they had no voice in selection process or even in the administration of the institution. Right up until the very end is really patriarchal. In terms of what got you rejected, well, the first thing would be if you didn't complete the application properly, you didn't follow the rules.
Just like for college or university, okay.
Yes, exactly. The second is if you came from the wrong side of the tracks. and you don't, and the third, you don't have a good letter of recommendation. But suppose a girl comes in and she has a perfect application on the face of it. Remember, well, there's 90 hearings and they accepted 50, right? So this is the beginning of the social investigator, like Jane Addams out in Chicago, where you go out and you start, the social investigators go out, and where are my sociology people? They go out and they ask questions about, is this true? So they go to the pastor, if she would list recommenders. So if they found one thing that did not, jive, boom, in the rejection pile. No ifs, ands, or buts. Yeah.
Okay, last couple of thoughts so someone else can get involved. Racial dynamics. We know there are individuals who look like me. How many of them were in the foundling home? And also, when you consider, I'm just thinking about the other piece here, there's a racial dimension to that, I would think. But
Is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a racial dimension. And so in the 18th century, this is something that needs to be written up, and I haven't done it yet, but I have the paperwork. You know what? I need more time. Anyway, but there's records of West Indian planters sending their mulatto children over to the founding hospital, and they pay huge amounts of money to take care of these children there, to raise them. And so that's one angle. And then in the 19th century, there are records, and I think these children again come from Jamaica and Barbados, and nothing has been done on that bill. It's a worthy project. Yeah.
And you answered my other question, Jane Addams, of course. The United States copied so much of what happened in England, Salvation Army, and all that other stuff. That was the model. So you answered that already, but thank you.
Yes. And I will say one thing. When they set up the founding in the 18th century, there was a lot of public opposition. And they said that they did not want it to be Catholic, because only Catholic countries do this, take care of their orphans. So there was a huge religious question involved in that too. So, okay. Thank you for your questions. They're great. Yes.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah. Okay.
Anybody?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned that majority of the women were like maids in wealthy homes. My question is, were some of these women assaulted and these babies were products of that?
That is a great question. And it's not like I set out to disprove that. Okay. But there are some women, there's another book by Francois Barré de Croix, who claims that some of these cases were a case of the head of the household taking advantage of, the housemates. But remember, I said they have a list of, by 1842, they start asking every single question. And they go out and they go out and ask the father's friends. They go in search of the father. They go in search of the head of the household. And truthfully, no respectable woman would bring anybody who was even slightly flirtatious into her house. She would not do that. She was careful of who she brought in. I'm not going to say it didn't happen, Mia, but if she had her petition was probably in the rejected pile, okay? Because of the consequence, she probably got rejected. Yeah, because I'll tell you why, most of the people had long-term relationships up to 2 years, 3 years. So that's one of the things where I like to do, I I never anticipated doing statistics with this project, right? But that was the only way I could cut through 3,000 petitions and make sense of it. So I worked on, do you know what columnar paper is? Like accounting paper? I started with accounting paper, and then I put every single question, I put every demographic issue and every single question across the top of the paper. And then I like, yes or no. Yes, she answered this. How many months did she know this guy? You know, how long? And then I calculated how long from the beginning of her courtship to the pregnancy. I calculated all of that. So I did all kinds of crazy math. I'm not a math person, but for this purpose, I was. And it was really interesting. So it gives you a lot of ideas of how to analyze material, big chunks of material. Yeah. Yeah. So I tell you, there are two books, one by Anna Clark and one by Francois Barré-Ducrot. And they're both very, very good books on this topic. But I built on their work and tried to see just what the truth, of course, the truth is always, it's like a vanishing point. Everybody in here will know, you're trying to get to it, and it's always a little cloudy. So that's a perfectly great question. Yeah, thank you. Kathy,
Dr. Jessica is Love Dorsey again. I have another question. So what was the rate of reoccurrence that a person, because this is a patriotic society, so women really didn't have a voice. And women that stayed in a relationship, and remember, they didn't have birth control, their pregnancies may have reoccurred. Is there any statistics that exist on maybe Lady A coming back several times over 10-year period?
She would have repeat, you mean like a repeat application? Yeah,
Absolutely.
it looks to me, this is just, I don't have statistical data on it. I can't tell you that answer to that question. What I can tell you is that in the East End, in my maternity register, I did 3,000 cases in that. In that case, there were a lot of women who had had babies prior to being admitted to the maternity home for really good services, okay? And they got married so they could deliver their baby at this really good hospital for women. And I know that because she'll say, I had 8 pregnancies before, and I got married. I did all the calculations. So the idea of being married was more fluid in the 19th century than it is now. And it's likely that, yeah, she could have had more children, but there was a stigma attached. The people who are my age, I graduated college in 1973. So people of a certain age will know that if a girl was, had a baby in high school, that was, most people didn't even know she had a baby. She just disappeared, right? So the stigma
Correct.
was so severe that women committed suicide. They, when I talk about, I also did research in one of the first OBGYN hospitals in the East End of London. And that's where I saw all the horrific self-induced induced abortions. I mean, really unbelievable stuff, throwing yourself down a flight of steps and using crochet hooks and, taking nightshade. Do you know what I mean? Nightshades, that those little cherry tomatoes that you see around this nightshade, it causes you to bleed. It's a blood thinner.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like all kinds of things. And yeah, they putting in pessaries that have kind of abortifacients on them and all kinds of things that women, so this leads me kind of just to make a suggestion that I know there's a big push for gender history, right? There's a lot of push for gender history, but I think the history of women deserves a place in and of itself, and
A special place on a pyramid.
I always talk about the pyramid. She's good. Yeah, very good. Yeah. Yeah.
Doctor, could you expand on your research of the influx of the babies that were coming from the West Indies? I know you mentioned Jamaica, Barbados. I know those were colonized, countries there. Did they have a different criterion for the acceptance of those children because they had the ability to pay?
Yes. Yeah, it was ability to pay. You're exactly right. They had money. So, the British system, they're the first to outlaw slave trading in 1803. They stopped, I think that's the date. But by 1807, slave trading is ended through William Wilberforce, and they ended. And then they officially end the slave system by 1837. Parliament pays out. Parliament pays those sugar planters and rum plantation people and cotton. They pay those people for every single person that they liberated. They give them money. Hundreds of thousands of pounds they paid for their freedom. And I mean, that's way different. That's why I think my US history people, that is why I think the US has a much more conservative view than the British. I think the British take a different turn because they, we have our revolution, and that revolution is not for everybody. And that revolution, the South is what controls so much of our history right up to today. I mean, they really shape our history. And I think it's that, the origins is kind of the original sin, if you will. Yeah.
Well, the original sin were the indigenous people. I always remind people of that.
Okay. Yeah.
People, okay. And we can add that one, but you're right on there because much of the modeling in colonial Virginia and the whole East Coast named after Queen Elizabeth, it was modeled initially on the British foundations of government, et cetera, but, and the but always gets in the way, as Langston Hughes says, the so-called Americans, they would twist and turn and change the line of descent. For instance, patriarchy would be out the window, then the line of descent would be through the mothers. They did everything they could to get rid of some of the English institutions, ironically, after which they were modeled originally. And again, you had an abolitionist movement that started much earlier in England. In Great Britain, it was established in 1707. So there was a history of that. And however, though, there's the economic piece in that whole thing, as you know, because Great Britain wasn't doing all that exporting of tobacco and rum. They were what? They were bringing it in. So I mean,
they were buying it.
Yeah, I don't want to get into a whole big history thing.
No, but
and of course we'd have to wait for country status for Jamaica, but 1963, and Bahamas, etc. They remained colonies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other questions? Did I wear you out?
No, I was trying to get my question in.
Okay.
I'm interested in how you organized your research. You had a lot of data.
Yes.
What programs did you use?
Oh, that's really a good, I wish I had been skilled enough to use the Access database, but I used the Excel. I just used Excel and, learned how to crunch those numbers. And I did create chi-squares and all of that and p-values. And, but basically it's basic, simple math. And
Excel.
yeah,
Interesting.
I'm kind of the queen of Excel and Word.
Yes, I would think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Good.
yeah. Learned how to do that.
I wanted to ask you, how many years were devoted to amassing the information that resulted in your book?
Oh, yeah. I first started working on the materials in 1993. It took 10 years.
Mm.
Yes. Mhm. And organizing the material. How do you organize the material?
Right.
So how this part, just open parentheses, this research right here that I just recounted is only 1/3 of my dissertation. My dissertation is way too long, 798 pages. Somebody was evil.
Wow.
And somebody pushed me pretty hard. And so really, I felt like the Exorcist doll.
Wow.
but I allowed it to unfold organically. So that was the only thing I could do, was like to start with the petition. Well, tell the history of the foundling hospital in the 19th century, and then start with the petitioning process and follow through each question. The linchpin was the Hesse sermon. So I advise people, if you're doing any kinds of work where you can use sermons, by all means.
Is that found?
So you lived there for 10 years?
I didn't live in London for 10 years. I was there for a year and a half in the beginning. And then I went back in 1996. And then from 2000, I've been going there every single year until COVID. Yeah. Search every year in London. Yeah.
Was any of your data from Willesden Kingsbury Hospital? Or was it all from the foundling?
It's all from the foundling collection. And then I did use the other hospitals to tell the story of the East End Mothers Home, the Royal London Hospital, and the OBGYN hospitals. Yeah. But I don't use that, no. Yeah.
Does that institution still exist? You said that Prince Charles' wife, the museum anyway, that she is over that. Do they still have that functioning foundling institution, or is it finished?
It closed in 1952.
Okay.
The founding institution took up a huge block. Are you anybody familiar with London at all? Do you know where Russell Square is, or the British Museum? If you know where that is, it's in that neighborhood, in the neighborhood of the British Museum. So in 1929, by 1930, the governors had decided that they should move the children out of the city. And maybe that was a good thing in terms of the Blitz, but the problem was they moved the children out of the city, and the founding as an institution lost its presence and its charitable, supporters. Plus, by the 1930s and 40s, people began to question the institutionalization of children.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big social, I think that's a fair question to ask, but I'm always going to say, consider what the alternatives would be.
Right.
That's a really You know, that's a tough question that we face even here today. I mean, this is a contemporary issue, is how to help every living human being become a full person. And that is just a serious, serious question. Um, so as institutionalization, I mean, even the Catholic charities lost their cachet and ability to care for children and closed their places. So there was in 1870, the Sisters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul, the ones that look like the flying nuns, they opened a house of charity for children, and they cared for out of wedlock children. But then they were prosecuted by the Medical Board of Health because they did not have
like really bad people. The nuns.
Are you still working with your records and data?
Yes.
Okay.
I will be.
I'm a statistics person, and my first 2 degrees are in French, and so I'm a humanities person. But my last couple of degrees are in math and statistics and so forth. Yeah, it seems like you could use some of the statistical packages that would facilitate a lot of your analysis.
You know, Robert, I just wish I were not so math illiterate in math. You know, I tried, I used SPSS.
Yes.
And I learned how to use that. I really learned how to use that. And, but what happened was I couldn't wrap my mind around it. And I think I needed somebody like you to work with me on it, you know, that would say, hey, this is really quite the finding and of great value. So I don't know who your mentee is, but whoever it is, they're very fortunate if you can help them with that kind of thing. Yeah.
Dr. Jessica, did many of the children write memoirs or stories about being raised at Foundling?
No, not too much. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know. I can't answer that. There's a current exhibition right now at the Foundling Museum. Marilyn has it. It's Hidden Voices. And these are the grandchildren of the Foundlings. And
I'll forward it.
I was, yeah, she can forward it to you. And when you get a chance to go to the UK, please do go to the museum. It's such a worthy place to visit, along with Charles Dickens's house is not far away. So, and it's only 3 blocks or 4 blocks from the British Museum. So, and the British Library is right across the street. So it's all within walking distance. Somebody asked about the nuns. Did somebody ask about the nuns? Yes, Mia.
I watch like a lot of historical documentaries, which is why like I like this type of stuff. But I remember watching a documentary about the nuns of St. Vincent de Paul, and they were like having orphanages for children, but the children weren't being properly taken care of, and there was a lot of like records of like abuse going on from the nuns and from other children to other children. And then I ended up seeing something about a biracial Irish. She's a Black woman of Irish descent, and she was raised in the orphanages because her mother had the baby out of wedlock. And basically, she told her entire story, and they met up with like former orphans who spoke on the tragedies that went on there. It was really sad, like really, really sad.
Yeah, the Irish, I know there's stories, and the Irish sisters are frequently accused of being brutal and you know, who knows how many children out of the hundreds of thousands of children cared for in an institution receive that kind of treatment. And I don't know. It's sad. It's just horrific. I hate to hear about it, but it's true. Yeah, I'm just telling you. And you're right. You're right, Mia. And these especially the Irish sisters from the 1940s and 50s are the ones that are tagged with this, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's really tough.
Well, we don't want to abuse the privilege of your being here, Jessica, but I think based on this wonderful sharing of your life and your research, I'm sure we would want to extend to you an honorary Lincoln Lion mentor position.
Okay, count me in.
Okay.
Count me in. I'm happy to help. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for coming, and I will
You're
forward your material, and we just want to thank you very much.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you.
It's
And
my
Dr.
joy.
Jessica, congratulations for
Thank
meeting your
you.
passion,
Thank you.
addressing your challenge. Even academically, you became stronger by doing it. And that's what these scholars need to hear. Even graduating with your master's or doctorates, it doesn't matter. It's not over. Some days
That's-
it's just beginning.
Yeah, I totally agree. The wiser words were never said. It's true. You never know. You just never know. You never
You
know.
never
what's-
know.
Nope. And take that, the door opens and you have to go through it. And you just have to say, I'm going with for me, I'm going with the grace of God,
Yeah.
just
Excellent.
so that's for me.
Amen.
Amen.
But my
So much.
philosopher is saying, well, you just have to have strength, right?
Very
That's
good.
what he's saying. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome, everybody. Have a great evening and take care and stay COVID safe. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Be
you.
well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Button, you have anything for the students?
No, except that I am contacting one by one just to make sure everybody's on point to go over some material.